Great. So perfect. So there we go. So we've got a recording in progress. We've probably got some people that are going to come in kind of as we go through the training session. So again, welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Amanda Kreischer. I am a licensed certified clinical social worker here in the state of Maryland and the senior director for the Engage with Skills training programs. I have been in the social work field for just about 15 years at this point. My work has kind of taken me from direct care into training and education. So I spent some time as a social worker in a hospice organization, as well as a community health and wellness program supporting mostly older adults with chronic health conditions, trying to ensure that their social and emotional needs were being met to help them better manage their chronic health conditions and avoid coming back to the hospital. So at some point, you'll hear me maybe share some kind of stories or insights on those experiences, as well as some information from other groups that I have trained. We have been doing this program, the Engage With program, for 7 total years now. I've been with the program for 5.5. We started our trainings as live in person, and we were in the process of converting to digital and virtual model even before COVID hit. And then COVID happened, and we know that training and education being delivered virtually, especially when it's live, is really a lot more sustainable for many people. Makes it a lot easier to attend those trainings. So thank you again for taking some time to be with us this morning for our Unlocking Connections, Mastering the Three Pillars of Effective Communication. So I am the kind of presenter who I want you to interrupt me if you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got concerns. Feel free to type them in the chat. Patrice and I will be monitoring that. You can also just turn your microphone on and shout it out. Don't feel like you have to wait for questions at the end. We'll have some time for that as well. But if not, that's okay. Like, we'll just kind of stop as we go. I also am the kind of person, and our trainings are designed to be very interactive. So we're going to have some different kind of experiential learning opportunities throughout the training. We're going to probably break up into some small group rooms and some breakout rooms, and just have an opportunity to kind of practice some of the skills that we're talking about. Okay, so enough of that kind of housekeeping stuff. Let's jump right in here. So, our learning objectives for our time together today are, first of all, we want to be able to define the three pillars of effective communication. So, that's our active listening, our nonverbal communication, and our verbal expression. We're going to be able to describe how respect and effective communication are essential to building meaningful connections. And then finally, we're going to apply some strategies to support effective communication. So that's what we're hoping to get through in our next, 60 to 75 or so minutes together. So let's talk about communication. So, what exactly is communication? How would you define it? And for this, you can put in your definition into the chat. Feel free to turn your microphone on, but like, how would you define or describe communication? I promised you I'd be interactive here. So here's our first stop on the interactive tour of our training session. Anyone have a definition that they'd like to share? Um, the information on the slides, yes. Yes, there will be question in the chat just came in if there'll be access to the slides. We don't usually share the specific slides, but we do have summaries about the information, so we will have that available. Okay, great. So I'm seeing some responses. So sharing messages or feelings via words, body language, facial expressions, gestures, how we interact with each other. Excellent messages being conveyed through verbal and nonverbal words and body movements. Effectively sharing a message. I like the word effectively from one party to another. It includes speaking, listening, and nonverbal. A method of conveying a thought, emotion, or other information that goes from one individual to another or to a group. group. Excellent. The ability to transfer information from person to person, groups, body language, etc. Great. And I apologize, I'm kind of looking between two screens. I have two monitors. Your chat box is over here, so it doesn't bother us on this screen. All right, excellent. So we got a lot of the components of effective communication, how we define it. So Webster's dictionary defines communication as the process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. And you got the three pieces of it. So that includes things like active listening, the things that we're doing to show that we are actually listening, absorbing that information from the person that we're talking to. Our nonverbal communication, which also includes those micro expressions. So those tiny little expressions that we sometimes don't even realize our face is doing, can say a lot for us as we're communicating. And then finally, the verbal communication. So we like to think of this as kind of working all together. So we have communication and we have these three different pieces. They all happen simultaneously. They're all working together to help us effectively communicate. Now, for the purposes of practice and skill building, we are going to look at these one at a time. So, recognizing that these do kind of all occur at the same time, but we are going to very purposefully look at each one individually. Before we do that, though, there's a couple pieces to communication that don't completely fall under these three categories. So, when we're communicating with a person, we need to be respectful. So, what does that look like? What does that sound like? How do we define respect when we're working with other people? And again, feel free to put those in the chat. If you're comfortable, you want to turn a microphone on and just shout them out, that's great too. What is respect? How do we define that? Are our definitions going to all be the same or are they going to be different? Okay, so yeah, this is one that I typically hear, treating others the way that you want to be treated. Great. So we kind of have a thought or a feeling about the way that we would want somebody to treat us. And so our goal is to treat other people the same way. Interestingly, in a presentation that I gave recently, somebody took that kind of initial sentiment and said, treating them the way that you want to be treated or better, because sometimes we're not always great at treating ourselves super nice, especially if we're in kind of a helping professional. We're really good at like give, 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 give. And we maybe aren't always the greatest at supporting ourselves. So I kind of liked this added piece. Maybe if there's things that we want to work on about the way that we treat ourselves, like we can take that information and pull it out with the other person. So that's a great definition. We also can think about respect as, just kind of the connection that we're building with a person, or the politeness that we're expressing. Meeting other person on their level with humility, patience, tolerance, listening to learn. And hearing the other person. Right. So I love that. Listening to learn. We have two ears and one mouth, right? So we should be using our ears more frequently than we're using our mouth when we're communicating with a person. And a lot of times we are listening to respond. Like, how many times have you been in a conversation where the person's talking to you and like you're already thinking about what you're going to say to the thing that they've just communicated to you? When we're doing that, we're not listening to hear what they're saying. So we want to kind of take that step back and use those ears a little bit more and really try to absorb that information. One of the things that's really critical to me about the concept of respect, kind of going back to the first example of treating people the way that you want to be treated, is that respect looks different for every person. So, what I consider respectful might be different than what my colleagues consider respectful or the older adults that I'm working with. So, respect, we like to kind of think of it in this concept of respect being in the eye of the beholder. So, we can think we're doing all the right things. We can think that we're being super respectful. We're, hitting kind of all the things that we would want somebody to do to us. But it could be that we're kind of missing the mark somehow. So I'll give you an example. I am originally from central New York area, the green part of New York State, way far away from New York City. And when I moved to Maryland, I started my career in Baltimore City's Department of Social Services as a family preservation caseworker. And my first kind of interactions with my clients, everyone kept referring to me as Miss Amanda. And I was like, this is so strange. Like, I'd never been called Miss Amanda in my life. I was really glad they weren't calling me Miss Rakowski, my maiden name, because I'd be like, that's my mom. And so I was kind of in this moment where I was like, God, this doesn't make any sense to me. I was like, please just call me Amanda. Like, you don't have to call me Miss Amanda. And eventually I realized that that calling me Miss Amanda was a way of demonstrating respect to me. That was what was considered respectful in the culture of working, in Baltimore City and really kind of the Maryland area as a whole. And so once I kind of made that connection in my brain, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So this is something that maybe wasn't familiar to me. That wasn't a respect tactic that I was accustomed to, but that being in this new place, this new situation, I was able to learn more about my clients and realize that that was their way of being respectful to me. Now that I have a daughter of my own, she is very much learning that, kind of continued respect of calling people, um, Miss Jeff or Miss, Miss Jessica, Mr. Jeff, and those kind of things. So we really can kind of learn about respect also when it comes to culture. So certain regions may have different cultural or respect expectations. Different cultures define respect differently as well. So you might be working with a culture where there is kind of some differences with the way that respect is shown to different genders or different ages. So the key kind of takeaway here for me is this idea that we want to remember that respect is in the eye of the beholder. So we want to ask those questions. We want to find out, what does that person consider to be respectful? Because if it doesn't match our sort of definition of respect, we can make some changes so that we're still being respectful to that person. Any questions on that? Okay, great. So we know that respect is extremely important when it comes to communication. And there's another kind of emotional connection that's also really important when it comes to communication. And that is the concept of empathy. Now, how many
Looking
people?
for a way to stretch the dollar? With
Sorry,
Insurify,
that's
you can
like
cut your car.
ready to just go ahead and play all on its own. So I I love to show this video. You may have seen it, especially if you have young kids. I've seen it a couple times, but this is Murray from Sesame Street and Mark Ruffalo describing and explaining empathy. And what I love about it is it feels so real as they're going through that. So we're going to take just a few seconds to watch that. When it started playing, could everybody hear the sound okay? And I can't see your faces or your boxes. So okay, perfect. Thank you. A little message in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Then we'll take a second to kind of regroup on it.
Insurance bill in half. Getting a deal.
Hello, I'm Mark.
And I'm Murray.
And we're here to tell you about the word empathy.
Empathy, yes! Empathy!
Tell them about the word empathy.
Oh,
What's wrong?
well, you're not gonna believe this, Mark.
What?
But I can't remember what empathy means.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'll tell them what empathy means.
Oh, boy! This is so exciting! Mark Ruffalo is gonna tell us about empathy! Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy!
Can I do it?
Go, please, go for it, Mark.
All right. Empathy is when you're able to understand and care about how someone else is feeling.
Oh, right! That's what empathy is!
Yes, yes.
I don't get it.
What?
Sorry.
Okay, let me see if I can explain it to you in some way.
Okay, I'm gonna listen.
Let's say I'm walking along and oh,
What?
I stubbed my toe. Oh, that hurts.
Oh, you poor
Oh,
thing,
Murray,
Mark. Oh,
Murray.
that hurts. I
It
can
hurts
imagine
so much.
exactly how you feel.
That's
Ouch.
it.
Oh, wow, what's it?
That's it. That's empathy.
What's empathy?
You could imagine exactly how I feel. You could understand just how it felt. That's empathy.
I still don't get it.
What?
I still don't get it.
Okay. Let's think of another way.
Okay, let's think of another way. Thinking.
Oh, Murray,
What?
did I tell you about that time when I lost my favorite teddy bear?
Oh, no.
It was.
This is very sad. Did you love that teddy bear?
I
Mark?
loved that teddy bear.
Oh, I can imagine exactly how you feel. It's really sad feeling. It makes me want to cry like this.
It was sad. It was so sad. But you know what?
What?
You know what empathy is.
I do?
That was empathy.
What?
You could understand how I was feeling, exactly how I was feeling, and understood it. That's empathy.
I get it now. Yes! Yes, I get it!
Yes.
I understand
yes.
empathy!
You understand empathy,
I'm
Murray.
so happy right now!
I'm
it
happy
makes me want
too.
to dance the dance of happiness!
I can imagine exactly how you feel. I want to dance the dance of happiness too.
Then what are we waiting for?
Let's do
dance!
Empathy. Hello.
All right. So, kind of a really simple way to explain empathy, but I love how you kind of see the progression for Murray of like, oh, like he's expressing the empathy initially, but can't quite sort of connect the dots. And then in the teddy bear example, he gets it. And then they're able to kind of bring that sort of more positive side of empathy when they want to dance dance of happiness at the end. So I really like this video because I feel like it's a really good kind of simple explanation of what empathy is. A lot of times we talk about sort of the difference between sympathy and empathy when we're kind of talking about this particular topic, and I like to kind of think of the difference as I'll use an example to kind of illustrate it. So imagine you're kind of walking down the street. There's a big hole in the road. You look down the hole and you see your friend down there, and you look at them and you say, "Oh man, I'm so sorry that you're down here in the hole," and then you walk away. So like that's sympathy. You're expressing sorrow that they're in this situation, but we're not really like engaging the feeling. We're not really doing anything about it. Now, if we were taking a more empathetic approach, we would kind of get to the edge of the hole. We'd look down there and we would, maybe find a way to get down in that hole with that person. We get that ladder, we come down there, we can say, man, this is really like dark and scary down here. And I'm sure this has been really lonely. Let's, kind of find a way to get out of this together. So we're bringing ourselves into that moment with that person. I sometimes will have people say to me, well, what if you've never actually experienced the particular situation that the individual has is kind of relaying to you? And I think that's the beauty of empathy, is that we don't necessarily have to have had that same experience or even something similar, but our goal is to try to understand how that person is feeling. So using those active listening skills, using that kind of communication skill, and really figuring out what are those underlying feelings behind the information that they're telling us. And sometimes we might even be able to kind of pull it a little bit farther. So, we can see, or the person might say, I'm feeling really sad in this moment. And then they tell us a little bit more. And we might even be able to kind of take that empathy a little bit farther as we know more and say, wow, so you said you're feeling really sad. And I also hear you saying that you're feeling hopeless, right? Because sad and hopeless are going to be kind of two different emotions, two different feelings. So when we are kind of looking for those opportunities for empathy, we can also kind of build on maybe some of the feelings that the person is expressing. So respect and empathy really crucial in us being able to effectively communicate with a person, because we can, say all the right things, we can, use the correct kind of nonverbal communication, but if we're not building that connection with that person, if we're not having sort of that common ground that we've established, our communication efforts may not get us very far. So we are going to jump into active listening. And what we're going to do for this particular activity is we're going to break you up. We've got perfect. We've got like 19 or so of us here in the room. So we are going to break everyone up into pairs of two in breakout rooms. And what I'm going to ask you to do in these breakout rooms is I'm going to ask you to each take a turn being the speaker and the listener. So you can decide who goes first. And the speaker is going to have 2 minutes to share. You can use this topic or you can come up with a different one, but their favorite summer activity or their favorite thing to do in the fall. 2 minutes to share about that. Now, the listener, some things we have to remember as the listener. You are only listening. So no questions, no clarification, nothing like that. I want you just to listen to this person for those 2 minutes. When the 2 minutes is up, then we'll ask that listener to kind of recap back to the person, sort of summarize what they think they heard, and see how we did with our listening. And then we're gonna switch the roles. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can get us all into some breakout rooms. And we'll have 2 minutes. I will go ahead and kind of do a quick broadcast when those 2 minutes are up. And I want you to switch back to kind of that summarizing. We'll give you 2 minutes to do that, and then 2 minutes for the other person to speak, and then we'll also kind of do that. So we'll spend about 6 or 8 minutes on this, depending on how quickly we can do this. So let me see. All right, so I want to just take a minute to it looks like we've got maybe two more rooms that are just wrapping up. But as they are coming back, I just want to take a moment and kind of get some feedback. What was that experience like? How did it feel? Was it easy, hard? Tell me your thoughts. And feel free to just, you can, I think we have the raise hand icon on here, so you can raise your hand or you can just raise your hand. You can also just kind of shout out, whatever works. But tell me a little bit about how that experience went for you.
I can go first, if
Great,
that's
thank you.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. I met lovely Amanda Parkinson, who is now on the screen, and it was a wonderful conversation. She shared, do I share what she shared?
Just
Amanda?
if that's
Uh,
okay with her, or you can just kind of
Okay.
talk about sort of what it was like for you to be a listener or whatever feels good.
That's fine. I don't
Okay.
mind.
Okay, thank you. First of all, she was quite lovely in terms of describing everything that she enjoys doing. She enjoys hiking, outdoorsy. She mentioned, and I could really relate to the busyness of technology and the business world and how active it is. And she used the word go, go, go. It's just go, go, go. So she uses hiking to calm herself. She didn't use that word, but just kind of take into nature. And she really likes to have a slower pace, and she mentioned a simple pace, and there's physical benefits to hiking as well. And she particularly likes the warmer months to doing that. I meant to ask her what kind of shoes she uses. I'm looking for hiking shoes. So thank you, Amanda, for sharing that.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So Amanda, as the speaker, how did you know, like, did you get the sense that Dr. Jazz was listening? Was there anything like in particular um that kind of helped you sort of feel like you should keep going?
I think the nonverbal body language is really important. I think even though we weren't supposed to like interrupt with any similar thoughts or questions or anything like that. I think there's still ways that are nonverbal to allow someone to let you know that they're interested in what you're saying and that they're listening. I noticed that she was looking down, so I could assume that she was taking notes, so that she could then recall easier the different details of what I said. And she was also maintaining eye contact and giving head movements to show that she was genuinely listening.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Um, so we call those encouragers, kind of the simple things that we do. It's really, really hard to like not interrupt someone for 2 minutes and like just listen. Like we're not designed to do that very well. It is a skill and it takes practice. But as Amanda was saying, there are ways that we can kind of encourage someone to keep going, to keep saying things to us by using some nonverbal. So, like head nodding, we might kind of do like a little sort of noise or something like that, and that's really going to communicate back to that person that we are paying attention. Now it would have been really different if on the screen, like, if I was talking to Amanda and I'm like looking like this with my phone there, like she probably would have said, "Mm-mm, no, I'm done. I'm not talking to this person anymore," because my nonverbal communication was saying, "I'm not really listening, as there's something else that's more important to me on my phone." So, so nonverbal communication is really critical, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, as well. Any other kind of thoughts about sort of this particular activity? Okay, great. Well, thank you for. Oh yeah, Jules, go ahead.
I thought it was kind of difficult to not ask questions as we were talking. Like my partner explained that they like to go to the beach, and I wanted to be like, "What beach? Where is it? Show me, tell me."
Yep.
Like it was hard to not ask questions in the moment. So
Yeah.
I had to like pool my questions until the end after I like said everything that I heard back.
Hmm. Great. And I love that you brought that up, because that kind of goes back to this concept of like being able to just sit back and listen and not jump in with a question, or not, have like something else that we want to kind of add to the conversation. That is a skill that takes practice. We often have, more of a back and forth kind of conversation with people, but there are times when we're working with individuals where we do need to just sit back and listen. So I like this activity because it gives us that chance to practice. And this is a fun thing that you can do. You can subject your family to it, your friends, whoever you want, just be like, okay, I'm just going to listen to you for 2 minutes, or will you just like listen to me for 2 minutes? It's a great chance to just kind of continue to put that in our brains. It also allows us to practice like that pause. So Jules, you were talking about, like I wanted to ask a question, I wanted to keep going, but you used that restraint, you used some pause to kind of say like, wait a minute, this isn't my role right now, is to be the listener. My role isn't necessarily to gather more information, or to share my thoughts about what this person is sharing with me, but I'm listening, I'm absorbing it, I'm getting that information. Okay, nice work. So to kind of wrap up our kind of discussion here. Oh boy, see, sometimes when I go to share things, it does weird stuff. Okay, so we're going to go back into our presentation here. It's going to share for me the wrong screen again. Are you seeing my note screen? Or is it
Yeah,
sharing the
I
correct
see.
screen?
Your notes.
Yeah, why is it doing this? It's so bizarre. Screen two. There we go. Okay, there it is. All right. So we did our experiential learning. Hopefully that was kind of a fun opportunity. And let's sort of pull some kind of pieces of active listening, sort of some key takeaways here. So when we're actively listening, we want to find ways to engage with the person as they're talking. So Amanda and Dr. Jazz gave some examples of sort of those head nods, the eye contact. It can be verbal, it can be nonverbal, but we want to show that person that we are listening. We can also demonstrate an understanding of what's being said as well as what's being felt. And sometimes those will not match. So it's possible that the person might be saying to us, that everything's great. They totally feel fine. It's all, it's all good. But like their physical self isn't showing us that. And so we might be able to gather that maybe what they're actually feeling is not these positive emotions. And so we can kind of bring that in as we're reflecting back to that person. It's also really helpful if we can integrate an awareness of their history in our responses. So when we have opportunities to work with people for longer periods of time, we're going to know more about that person. And when we know more about that person, we can bring that in to our conversations as they go kind of further or deeper. So it could be, if somebody kind of shares with you, um, an example that I can share is, having an older adult that I was working with who was a military veteran, served in World War II. And knowing that about him gave me some clues on kind of how to communicate with him, what were going to be the things that were going to feel most comfortable, how much he was going to be willing to share or not share. And so there were times where, he felt more comfortable sharing more with me, and we could talk a little bit deeper about his military experience. And then there were other times where that was just a topic that we needed to just kind of be there, and go back to when he was ready. So when we know more about the person, we can incorporate that. Think about, in kind of a sometimes in like more of a case manager or sort of therapeutic context, we might kind of use this history in our summary. Last time you shared with me this information, we didn't get a chance to kind of cover that topic fully. So I wanted to loop back because it seemed like you had more you wanted to share with that. So again, we're kind of pulling that sort of knowledge back in. Any questions on active listening? Okay. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about nonverbal communication. And nonverbal communication is really interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading on nonverbal communication because it's fascinating to me. And there's so many different ways that we can communicate nonverbally. And so I'd like to kind of share a few of kind of the highlights when it comes to nonverbal communication and how we can use that effectively. So, nonverbal communication involves things like our eye contact and our facial expressions. Now, some of the people in this particular set of pictures, I'm looking particularly at the lady on the kind of top right hand corner of the slide. She looks bored. And like her facial expression to me is not like, oh, please tell me more. Um, like I feel like she doesn't want anything to do with the conversation at all right now. The lady down on the kind of like the bottom left, she looks really excited or energized. And so maybe there's something really happy that she just found out or that somebody just told her. So those facial expressions are really going to matter. Eye contact, the reason why we use the word appropriate eye contact is because there are certain times where eye contact might not be as appropriate. So I was working with a group of trainees one day, and we were talking about nonverbal communication, talking about eye contact. And one of the people in the room raised their hand and they said, Amanda, in our culture, it's considered extremely disrespectful to look an older adult in the eye. And I had to kind of pause for a second because that's not my cultural experience and I hadn't really thought about that. And so to have a person, who's a part of that culture really sit there and say to me, time out, let's think about, like, are there times where maybe eye contact might not actually be our best nonverbal communication? So now knowing that about that particular culture, I can be more mindful of that. Sometimes it's related to genders. Opposite genders have less eye contact or no eye contact. So again, we want to make sure we're aware of those cultural considerations. When it comes to our facial expressions, we hopefully recognize that there is a pretty significant difference between a person who is truly smiling versus a person who is smirking. So typically, a smile, I like to kind of imagine, when we are truly smiling, we have that genuine happiness. We see it in our whole entire face, eyes, cheeks, like everything. Smirking is kind of that, like, sort of like the lady in the top right corner slide here, where we're like, I don't know if, like, are they really like happy to hear what I have to say. So recognizing, when it's appropriate to use those smiles. As a person myself who's, tends to be pretty like bright and bubbly, I had to learn pretty quickly when I was working in hospice care that smiles were not always going to be fitting for the situation that I was in. And so I had to really practice that and really kind of work on that because my natural tendency didn't necessarily fit the environment or the situation. Eyebrows. Some people have extremely expressive eyebrows. I am not one of those people, but there are people who do. So our eyebrows can say a lot, and sometimes our eyebrows say things without us even realizing it. So, just again, if that's sort of part of your nonverbal communication, just being mindful of when we're using that eyebrow communication. Sort of the raised up eyebrows, if you're a person who wears glasses and you kind of get that little tilt down over your nose with the eyebrows raised, like all those things communicate something to a person. And then we also have our body language. So, body language includes things like how are we positioned? So, when we're communicating with a person, are we standing over them? Are we sitting next to them? Are we kind of at that eye level, whether we're using eye contact or not? Are we sort of on that same level? Our distance is also really important. So if we're really, really far away from a person, that's not going to feel really good. But we also don't want to be like so close that they're kind of backing away from us. So how we position ourselves is going to really matter. I like to think of it as kind of, facing the person sort of in this like square type of setting. You might turn a little bit to one way or the other, kind of depending on where you are, but making sure that you kind of have that sort of face to face as much as possible. This one can be a little bit difficult at times because we, sometimes just feel fidgety. But if we can kind of avoid that fidgeting, avoid looking at our watches or phones, that kind of looking at a watch or phone is something that will. That can communicate things that maybe we're not intending to. I worked with a person one time who, like every time we were in a meeting, would look at their phone at least like once or twice and it felt weird to me because I was like, oh, like, are we not, are things like not as kind of well connected with our communication as I thought they were, like what's kind of going on. So that was communicating something to me that didn't necessarily feel that great. All right. So we have we're gonna skip over one of our activities and we're going to go to a second activity. I'm going to share the information with you about this activity because this is something that, maybe later you want to grab a partner and give this a try. This is our experiential learning drawing activity. So what I usually like to do in this activity is provide some very simple drawings, like usually going into your icons in Word, a house, a car, a crab for Maryland, whatever the case might be. And usually what I like to do is pair people up and I will have them each take turns being the artist and the speaker. And what you're doing in this particular activity is the speaker is describing the picture to the person to draw. The key is that they can't say the object. So you can't say draw a house, but you could say in the middle of the paper, draw a big square. And so it's really interesting to kind of try to describe this picture and get the person to draw it accurately. When I did this with one group, I had one group that really struggled with it, And they showed me their picture at the end, and it was just like every object that the person had told them to draw was just drawn on top of each other. And so we were talking about, like, well, what happened? Why was it that things kind of just got drawn on top of each other? And the person who was drawing said, well, they never really gave me any indication of where these particular shapes needed to go on the paper. So start with a big square in the center. Now, inside of that square on the bottom middle, you're going to draw a small rectangle. But they just said, now draw a small rectangle. So they had like their square and then their rectangle on top and then a triangle, and it kind of built up rather than building together. And that was a great learning experience, a great learning opportunity, because that helped the speaker realize that when they are communicating, their communication needed to be a little bit more clear and a little bit more concise. So the next time they, maybe do an activity like this, they're going to change the way that they give that information. If you're familiar with, if you remember I'm pretty sure it was always science class that we did these kind of, experiments where they ask you to write down the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so usually people, okay, well, I'm gonna go, get the bread. Okay, great. Get the bread and put the peanut butter on the bread. But you might not have a step that told you to go get the peanut butter. Or even if you did have a step that told you to go get the peanut butter, it might have not have said where the peanut butter was or how to get it. Like if it's in a pantry, you need to walk to the pantry, open the pantry door by pushing the handle down and pulling the door open. Look on the bottom shelf, find the peanut butter jar. Take the peanut butter jar in your hands out of the pantry, walk it over to the counter, set it down, open the lid by unscrewing it, right? So you can see, like, there's a lot of tiny, tiny little steps that we don't always communicate because we are just kind of under the impression that, like, everybody knows how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So we don't need to give those details. But if a person's never made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you tell them to get the bread, so they get the loaf of bread, they put it down, and you tell them to put the peanut butter on the bread. Now I take the peanut butter jar and I put it on top of the bread loaf. Okay, I've made a sandwich. Not really. So again, the point of these types of activities is really to get us thinking about how do we very concisely and clearly communicate the things that we're trying to explain to that person. Now we will do the second activity because this one is really fun. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen again, and I know it's going to do its weird wonky thing once we get back to it, but that's okay. I like to be able to see everybody when we do these kind of experiences. So what I would love for us to do is think about the term elder speak. Does anybody know what elder speak is? And if you do, feel free to shout it out or type it in. All right, so what is elder speak? How do we define elder speak? All right. So people tend to infantilize elderly people by using a different tone of voice that they might use with children. Yes, it sounds like we're talking to a toddler or a puppy. I see a cute puppy on the screen. I don't know if it's actually a puppy, but all dogs are puppies to me for whatever reason. They could be 10 years old and they're still a puppy. But if you're a dog person or if you have children, like, there's like sort of this like sing-songy type voice that we kind of use when we're talking to them. Oh, do you need to go potty? And like that's how I talk to my toddler. So I like to give us an opportunity to kind of get this elder speak out of our system. And so if there is anyone who would be willing to to use some of their acting skills and say a phrase for me in their very, very best elder speak voice. And then once we all recover from that, then I'm going to ask you to kind of change it up and try to say it in a more adult to adult way. I will give us one to get started because I know it always feels better when somebody kind of gets us started. And I'm going to use my favorite one. And then if there's anybody who wants to try one or two, we can do that as well. So elder speak, my very, very best elder speak could be something along the lines of, do you need to go potty before we rest, Mrs. Smith? Now, does anybody want to talk to me? Anybody want to, is anybody going to go potty? Who goes potty? 3-year-olds. Like that's who like goes potty when they're like very first learning. I have a young child, so like I do still say potty, but like I only to her and like myself, right? So that didn't feel very good. Like if I was approaching you and was like, "Oh, let's go potty," you'd be like, "Get out of here. I don't want anything to do with you." So instead, I might, change it up. I might say something like, "Mrs. Smith, do you need to use the restroom?" So what do you like or dislike about either of those kind of ways of saying the same thing?
The second one has more dignity.
Dignity. Much more respectful. I'm talking to Miss Smith as if she is an adult, because she is, right? Like she's probably older than me. Okay, so we're using that dignity. All right. Anybody want to give it a try? Anybody want to have some fun with some elder speak? Renee, I see you smiling. Does that mean you want to try it?
So my other job, I work at a nursing home, and we get that a lot where it's like, oh, you spilled something. Oh, straighten up. I'm gonna put your bib on. It's not a bib, it's a clothing protector. Oh, the sing song. What it's like, you have to stop. They're still adults. Oh, do you need me to change your diaper? And it's like I
Yeah.
don't.
Ooh, ooh.
So I can go on for days. I'll let somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thank you for sharing some of those examples. It is so common. We don't always even realize we're doing it until we sort of like take a moment and stop and are like, "Ooh, wait a minute." Like if somebody was talking to me like that, I wouldn't be very responsive. And guess what? That's probably going to lead me to be a little bit aggressive, and I might slap that tray right away from you because I'm sorry. I'm not gonna, "Oh, you spilled your drink. Oh, let's put your bib on." Like, no, I'd be like, "Get away from me. Let
And
me just eat my food."
there are caregivers who get offended because they're like, because they use a word like sweetie, and for wherever they're from, that might be a term of endearment, but you're at work, this is an adult, and it's condescending. You don't do that. And so some of them will, get
Yeah, yeah, like because
Mm.
and I think Renee, that's a really great example of going back to this concept of being respectful, right? So like they think that they're doing the right things. They think they're being respectful, they think they're being kind, by calling a person sweetie or, we're in Maryland, hun, like super popular, right? So like we think that that might be considered respectful. And maybe for us, like we would like it if somebody said that to us or responded to us in a particular way. And don't get me wrong, there are times where older adults do fine with this type of communication. I'm not sure I want to go as far as to say they like it. But that might just be okay for them. So I don't ever want people to not use strategies that work, but I think, Renee, what you're sort of sharing is getting people to recognize that initially, let's use that more adult to adult kind of common language. And then if we learn about the person that they love it, if we come in and are like, "Hey, Mrs. Smith, how are you today?" Like, great, then come in and be, "Hey, Mrs. Smith, how are you today?" But we want to take the opportunity to learn more about that person, to bring that respect into the conversation so that we are so that we're starting from that point of respect.
If
Wonderful.
I could
Thank you. Go
add
ahead, Amanda.
something as well,
Yeah.
just going off of what Renee said, I think the distinction between what makes it respectful and disrespectful as well is when you're at work, that person is then in a vulnerable setting. And so the vulnerability of the setting is then what makes it disrespectful and almost demeaning. It's not like they're out on the street or in a public mall, or like they are in a hospital, or they are in a like clinician's office, a social work office. Like usually the reasoning that they're there makes the situation and the setting particularly vulnerable for them. They don't have the
Yeah.
upper hand in that situation.
Absolutely. So they're in this vulnerable situation. Oh, Kenneth, did you have something to add?
Yeah, y'all engage with y'all work. We're gonna deal with that. Y'all chill. Y'all chill. We got that.
Um, so I mean, I think that's a great, a great example is that we also, sometimes when we are engaging this type of communication, we are doing so in a situation where that older adult or, the person that we're talking to is already sort of at a disadvantage when it comes to, I hate to use the word, but like but power, right? Like the dynamic between our sort of place versus their place can be really different. And so that also is going to contribute to what might be considered respectful for them in that moment. So in those situations, it's almost like we want to err even heavier on the side of being as respectful as we can and learning what's considered respectful to them, because there's this dynamic that we have, to no fault of our own, but just based on the circumstances, that's kind of where things are. So that's a great point. All right, now let's see if this is going to do this the way that I want it to do again. All right, wait, I think I might have actually gotten it right this time. Did I? Actual slide?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Figured it out. Only took 3 times. All right. So let's pull together some information here about verbal communication, kind of some key takeaways. So, speaking adult to adult, we're not talking to children. We're not talking to puppies. We're not talking to babies. We're talking to another adult. So, making sure we have that adult to adult tone. Mid-tone voice. This is really important when we're working with older adults, because what we know about hearing loss is that the higher tones are what we lose first. So a person who has like a naturally higher voice going to be a little more difficult for an older adult to hear. For example, my daughter, she's 5. She has a pretty high voice. My father in law sometimes has a difficult time hearing her because her tone is a little bit higher. When she's talking a little bit lower, it's much easier for him to hear that. So, that mid tone voice, that range is typically pretty strong. We also want to remember the pace of our speech. So, we don't want to speak so slowly that it's annoying, and we also don't want to be talking a mile a minute, so really finding kind of that even ground. Communication strategies that are appropriate for the disability or the need. This is something that we can kind of tailor to the individual. So if we know that their hearing loss is worse on their left side, then our strategy might be that we're going to always position ourselves on the right, or so that we're communicating a little bit more directly onto their right side because we know they hear us better on that side. We also can use something called a touchback to make sure that the person is understanding what we're saying. And this can be done in a very respectful and kind of way of not sort of pointing out any flaws that the other person might have. So if we're giving instructions, we could say something along the lines of, "Can you repeat that back to me to ensure I didn't miss anything?" So we're putting any pressure to remember all of the things that we wanted them to know or to understand in that moment back on ourselves, right? So we're not pointing out maybe that this person has difficulty with memory or anything like that, but we're kind of taking that pressure on ourselves. So those touchbacks can be really helpful, because we're giving them a chance to kind of paraphrase it back to us. And if they do miss something, then we can say, "Oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you that particular thing. Even if you didn't forget to tell them that particular thing, that's okay. We can use, we can continue to use ourselves as a way of, helping that person maintain sort of their dignity, like we talked about. We know that when it comes to communication, even if we do everything right, there can still sometimes be barriers. The good thing about barriers, though, is that they can be removed or kind of altered or changed. So, couple barriers that we kind of identify, we know barriers could be related to our senses, so hearing or vision. Usually can be corrected with hearing aids or glasses. Environmental interference, so if there's too much noise or too many people, I remember often going into people's houses, for home visits, and I would have, we'd be in the living room and the TV would be on really loud, and then there'd be like music in the background, and then people talking in the kitchen. And there were times where I would have to say to the people, "I'm having a really hard time hearing you. Do you mind if we turn the TV down or off?" So again, kind of taking that pressure onto myself, but using me as a way to kind of reduce some of that interference. A barrier could also be that we don't have all the information that we need. So, an example could be, if you're working with a person and they sleep all day and they're wide awake all night, and you're thinking to yourself, what on earth is going on? Why are their days and nights flipped? What you don't know about them is that they worked night shift for their entire career. And so now that we know that, now we can kind of use that information to help us kind of better manage and not be fighting with them to go to bed at night. There could also be a misunderstanding. So, did we interpret something incorrectly? Was there a bias maybe that kind of came into play in this, or maybe we have a different perspective on the situation? Again, the good news about these things is that usually with some more communication, we can try to resolve them. And then behavioral health disorders like cognitive impairment, depression, or anxiety, those could also potentially be barriers to communication, which hopefully we can address as well. So, some specific communication strategies to kind of help us pull this all together. Number one is making sure that when we're communicating, we're doing so in a very clear and concise way. So, using action words, right? So, that could be, something like, would it work for your schedule for me to come back this Thursday at 2 p.m.? It's very clear and concise. We also kind of we want to make sure again we're sort of going back to this respect concept, so remaining courteous and having an open mind even when we disagree. So that can be really hard sometimes, but just trying to be as open in our communication as possible. Recognizing that our nonverbal communication is extremely important. So, one statistic that I found recently really blew me away. It says that between 65 and 93% of our nonverbal communication has more of an impact than the words coming out of our mouth. So, if the words and the nonverbal don't match, 65 to 93% of the time, people are going to believe that nonverbal. They're going to really focus in on that. So that really matters. So we really want to be mindful of that. Our tone, we know, also matters. We talked about that with elder speak. We talked about that with hearing, kind of making sure that it's in sort of that appropriate tone level. It's also really helpful when we can use multiple modes of communication. That could be that we are communicating verbally, in writing, so visual. It could be nonverbal communication, but that can really help people kind of absorb more of that information as we're sharing it with them. It could be a chart. It could be pictures. If there's something that we kind of need them to kind of visualize that we're going to do. Practice active listening. So play the 2-minute listening game. Give yourselves those opportunities to kind of build on that skill. We also, another really important thing is building our emotional intelligence. And this is something that, is really goes back to like the concept of empathy and kind of creating that empathy in ourselves and being able to bring that into our conversations. Another thing that's really important is being able to embrace feedback. This is not easy. When somebody tells us that we kind of missed the mark, it doesn't always feel good. However, it is a great opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about ourselves and maybe practice something different. So, even though it can be hard and we might not want to accept that information, try to embrace it when it comes because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's just going to help you be a better listener. So now let's talk about some communication strategies specific to hearing loss, especially for those of us who are working with older adults. We know hearing loss can be a challenge. So, couple kind of key things to keep in mind here. So, we want to be seen as well as heard. So, good lighting, again, kind of that square position with that person. So, our facial expressions and our gestures can also kind of give clues. Some people who have difficulty with hearing loss also get really good at reading lips. So that's another reason to be kind of forward facing. I have a friend who has some hearing loss, and she reads lips. So for her, you have to be kind of right in front of her so she can also see what your lips are doing. We want to face that person and speak clearly, no mumbling or kind of that low tone. Maintaining eye contact as appropriate. We want to do something that we like to refer to as preserving their ego. So, what does this mean? Essentially, this means that we are going to be allowing them to see themselves the way that they want to see themselves. If that picture of themselves isn't accurate in our mind, that's okay. If it is keeping them in a kind of content place, then we don't necessarily need to change it. So that could look like kind of asking ourselves a couple of questions when we maybe are tempted to sort of get a person to see something about themselves that they're not really ready to or able to. We can ask ourselves two questions. One, is the information true that we're trying to share with them? And two, is it going to help the situation? Usually, if we say no, it's not going to help the situation, we just kind of let it go. Not really important. So preservation of ego is just allowing people to see themselves the way that they want to see themselves, as long as that's not causing any impact on anything else. We want to remember to be patient, speak naturally, and include them in the conversation as much as possible. When we're able to, also finding a quieter space to help reduce some of that background noise can be helpful as well. So, in our last few moments together, what I'd like you to do is hopefully somewhere near you, you have a notebook or a scrap piece of paper. And based on the information that we have gone over this afternoon, morning and afternoon, I'd like you to write down two or three ways that you hope to improve your communication with those that you work with based on the information that you've learned today. So I'll give you a few moments to jot those down. Um, just kind of think about, reflecting on your own communication strategies. Are there things that you would like to incorporate or improve on based on the information we talked about today? And once you've had an opportunity to do that, we've got a couple minutes for questions. I am also going to put the QR code up here for completing our brief survey. I'm not really sure why there's a question mark on there. I guess me just being really polite and saying, please, would you do this? But if you could complete that survey, it would be most helpful, especially if you are interested in receiving those social work continuing education credits. And I believe Patrice will also drop the link into the chat as well for the survey. All right, so I'm gonna just stop sharing my screen here, and just check in and see if anyone is open to sharing one or two of the ways that they're hoping to change or adjust their communication, or if there's any questions in our last few minutes together. All right. If there are no questions, no other comments, if you could just please be kind enough to complete that brief survey for us. We would greatly appreciate that, and we will hope to see you at some future trainings. This is a new initiative that we are kicking off, so we will be offering. Trainings once a month through this particular series. So next month we will be focusing on the gifts of gratitude and self care. Yes, that's that one. I'm trying to remember the schedule. So you'll see some information coming out about that and registration shortly. They will typically be the second Tuesday of each month, same time. So we hope that you will be able to join us for some future sessions as well. I appreciate those of you who kind of are sharing some of your thoughts and ideas on how you're going to work to improve your communication. Much appreciated in your willingness to share that. And again, I want to thank you for being here with us today. I hope that the information was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. The training at engagewith.org is probably the easiest email to remember. So you can reach out to us there, and we will be in touch for those of you who are interested in the social work continuing education credits. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some folks asking about the slides. We will be sending out a link to the recording from today's session, which I meant to stop.